I'm Jeremy. Today's day 415 of reading, trading Harry Potter and Order the Phoenix. Let's get started. Currently on page 364. Let's go. I got a bunch of likes yesterday. TYSM. Let's go. Professor Umbridge scribbled on her clipboard. And you have applied regularly for the Defense Against the Dark Arts post since you first joined the school, I believe? Yes, said Snape quietly, barely moving his lips. He looked very angry. Do you have any idea why Dumbledore has consistently refused to appoint you? Said Umbridge. I suggest you ask him, said Snape jerkily. Oh, I shall, said Professor Umbridge with a sweet smile. I suppose this is relevant? Snape asked. His black eyes narrowed. Oh, yes, said Professor Umbridge. Yes, the Ministry wants a thorough understanding of teachers' backgrounds. She turned away, walked over to Pansy Parkinson, and began questioning her about the lessons. Snape looked around at Harry, and their eyes met for a second. Harry hastily dropped his gaze to his potion, which was now congealing foully and giving off a strong smell of burned rubber. No marks again, then, Potter, said Snape maliciously, emptying Harry's cauldron with a wave of his wand. You will write me an essay on the correct composition of this potion, indicating how and why you went wrong, to be handed in next lesson. Do you understand? Yes, said Harry furiously. Snape had already given them homework, and he had Quidditch practice this evening. This would mean another couple of sleepless nights. It did not seem possible that he had awoken that morning feeling very happy. All he felt now was a fervent desire for this day to end as soon as possible. Maybe I'll skive off divination, he said glumly as they stood again in the courtyard after lunch, the wind whipping at the hems of robes and brims of hats. I'll pretend to be ill and do Snape's essay instead. Then I won't have to stay up half of the night. You can't skive off divination, said Hermione severely. Hark, who's talking? You walked out of divination. You hate Trelawney, said Ron indignantly. I don't hate her, said Hermione loftily. I just think she's an absolutely appalling teacher and a real old fraud. That means you do hate her. But Harry's already missed history and magic, and I don't think he ought to miss anything else today. There was too much truth in this to ignore. So half an hour later, Harry took his seat in the hot, over-perfumed atmosphere of divination classroom, feeling angry at everybody. Professor Trelawney was handing out copies of the Dream Oracle yet again. He would surely be much better employed doing Snape's punishment essay than sitting here trying to find the meaning of a lot of made-up dreams. It seemed, however, that he was not the only person in divination who was in a temper. Professor Trelawney slammed a copy of the Oracle down on the table between Harry and Ron and swept away. Her lips pursed. She threw the next copy of the Oracle at Seamus and Dean, narrowly avoiding Seamus's head, and thrust the final one into Neville's chest with such force that he slipped off his poof. Well, carry on, said Professor Trelawney loudly, her voice high-pitched and somewhat hysterical. You know what to do, or am I such a substandard teacher that you have never learned how to open a book? The class stared perplexedly at her, then at each other. Harry, however, thought he knew what was the matter. As Professor Trelawney flounced back to the high-backed teacher's chair, her magnified eyes full of angry tears, he leaned his head closer to Ron's and muttered, I think she's got the results of her inspection back. Professor, said Parvati Patil in a hushed voice. She and Lavender had always rather admired Professor Trelawney. Professor, is there anything, wrong? Wrong, said Professor Trelawney in a voice throbbing with emotion. Certainly not. I have been insulted. Certainly. Insinuations that have been made against me. Unfounded accusations leveled. But no, there is nothing wrong. Certainly not. She took a great shuddering breath and looked away from Parvati, angry tears spilling from under her glasses. "I say nothing," she choked, "of 16 years' devoted service. It has passed, apparently unnoticed, but I shall not be insulted. No, I shall not." "But, Professor, who's insulting you?" said Parvati timidly. "The establishment," said Professor Trelawney in a deep, dramatic, wavering voice. "Yes, those with eyes too clouded by the mundane to see as I see, to know as I know. Of course, we seers have always been feared, always persecuted. It is, alas, our fate." She gulped, dabbed at her wet cheek with the end of her shawl, and then pulled a small embroidered handkerchief from her sleeve, which she blew her nose very hard with a sound like peas blowing a raspberry. Ron sniggered. Lavender shot him a disgusted look. "Professor," said Parvati, "you mean it is something Professor Umbridge?" "Do not speak to me about that woman!" cried Professor Trelawney, leaping to her feet, her beads rattling and her spectacles flashing. "Kindly continue with your work." And she spent the rest of the lesson striding among them, tears still leaking from behind her glasses, muttering what sounded like threats under her breath. "May well choose to leave. The indignity of it. On probation, we shall see how she dares." "You and Umbridge have got something in common," Harry told Hermione quietly when they met again in defense against the dark arts. "She obviously reckons Trelawney an old fraud, too. Looks like she's put her on probation." Umbridge entered the room as he spoke, wearing her black velvet bow and an expression of great smugness. "Good afternoon, class." "Good afternoon, Professor Umbridge," they chanted dully. "Wands away, please." But there was no answering flurry of movement this time. No one had bothered to take out their wands. Please turn to page 34 of Defensive Magical Theory and read the third chapter, entitled The Case for Non-Offensive Responses to Magical Attack. There will be no need to talk, Harry, Ron, and Hermione said together under their breaths. "No Quidditch practice," said Angelina in hollow tones when Harry, Ron, and Hermione entered the common room that night after dinner. "But I kept my temper," said Harry, horrified. "I didn't say anything to her, Angelina. I swear I know, said Angelina miserably. "She just said she needed a little bit of time to consider." "Consider what?" said Ron angrily. "She's given the Slytherins permission. Why not us?" But Harry could imagine how much Umbridge was enjoying holding the threat of no Gryffindor team over their heads, and could easily understand why she would not want to relinquish that weapon over them too soon. "Well," said Hermione, "look on the bright side. At least now you'll have time to do Snape's essay." "That's a bright side, is it?" snapped Harry, while Ron stared incredulously at Hermione. "No Quidditch practice and extra potions?" Harry slumped down into a chair, dragged his potions essay reluctantly from his bag, and set to work. It was very hard to concentrate. Even though he knew that Cyrus was not due in the fire until much later, he could not help glancing into the flames every few minutes just in case. There was also an incredible amount of noise in the room. Fred and George appeared finally to have perfected one type of skiving snack box, which they were taking turns to demonstrate to a cheering and whooping crowd. First, Fred would take a bite out of an orange end of a chew, at which he would vomit spectacularly into a bucket that they had placed in front of them. Then he would force down the purple end of the chew, at which the vomiting would immediately cease. Lee Jordan, who was assisting the demonstration, was lazily vanishing the vomit at regular intervals with the same vanishing spell Snape kept using on Harry's potions. What with the regular sounds of retching, cheering, and Fred and George taking advance orders from the crowd, Harry was finding it exceptionally difficult to focus on the correct method for strengthening solutions. Hermione was not helping matters. The cheers and sound of vomit hitting the bottom of Fred and George's bucket were punctuated by loud and disapproving sniffs that Harry found, if anything, more distracting. "Just go and stop them, then," he said irritably, after crossing out the wrong way of powdered Griffin claw for the 4th time. "I can't. They're not technically doing anything wrong," said Hermione through gritted teeth. "They're quite within their rights to eat the foul things themselves, and I can't find a rule that says the other idiots aren't entitled to buy them, not unless they've proven to be dangerous in some way, and it doesn't look as though they are." She, Harry, and Ron watched George projectile vomit into the bucket, gulp down the rest of the chew, and straighten up, beaming with his arms wide to protracted applause. You know, I don't get why Fred and George only got 3 OWLs each, said Harry, watching as Fred, George, and Lee collected gold from the eager crowd. They really know their stuff. Thank you everyone. That's all for today. Bye, see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're going to read page 369. Bookmark are closed. Peace out.